Before we start, I just want to give a quick thank you to all of the crewmates who are supporting the channel on the SocraTetris Patreon page. If you are enjoying the channel, consider pitching in $3 a month in order to help me make videos and to have your name credited here at the start. With that said, let's begin. What's the worst plan? Shadow of the Erdtree is both the objectively best DLC that From Software has ever made, and it is objectively the worst reviewed DLC it has ever released by user-generated scores on Steam and other marketplaces. It has more bosses, more boutique level designs, more weapons and spells and armors, more new mechanics, both universal and contextual, all delivered in a packed open world that doesn't waste time with empty space. It is designed just as much as any of their dungeons, yet also doesn't need a cluttered UI to guide the player to all of the secrets which are better exposed through clever environmental artistry. It even has the hardest bosses they have ever made, the rallying cry of their most dedicated fans. But it is rated so remarkably poorly because people are literally arguing that the way the DLC was designed goes against the developer's intent. I'm going to go full mask off as a FromSoft fan poser and add to this section a blasphemous argument when it comes to how we defend these games we love. There is no such thing as developer intent. And the arguments defending the game through the concept of developer intent, as I literally just did when talking about how I experienced playing the game with a party, are inherently bullshit. Now, I don't mean that the devs at From Software don't intend things when they create their games. Of course they intend things. What I mean when I say that there is no such thing as developer intent is that you, me, we as the audience of these games have no idea whatsoever about what their intent actually is. Game development is a long, messy, and collaborative process. Design documents iterate and change all the way up to a game's launch and thereafter. You can link to articles interviewing Miyazaki, but Miyazaki isn't the only creator at From Software whose intent is guiding the direction of the game. As RPGs, these games have complexity and depth such that no one way of approaching the game will ever be the one way all players have to approach the game. As a case example, let's look at Henry Randall writing an op-ed for the magazine PC Gamer. Let's pull a few quotes from their article. I'm going to read his quotes like a posh asshole, but I don't actually think Henry Randall is an asshole. I don't know the guy. I can't tell you whether he's an asshole or not. But anyways, here we go.
Fine friends and fellows, I beat Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree yesterday, and I did so without summons or spirit ashes. I will be expecting my personal signed picture of Miyazaki saying good job with a thumbs up shortly, and we can hammer out the details of a parade in my honor later. In Sekiro, chief of these is the timed block, which turns dealing with certain attack strings into a rhythm game. Before you can tackle any boss in earnest, Sekiro wants you to learn them. You must respect their entire moveset, tune into their timing, and adjust. It requires patience and observation.
Both of these quotes I'm using here show Henry arguing for playing the correct way that the game wants you to play, and yet purposefully limiting himself to only a subset of options while devaluing the other options available, as he's about to do.
I broadly disagree with the assumption I've seen some players make that Erdtree's fights were built with ashes and summons as a baseline. In fact, I actually think that spirit ashes, while absolutely making the fights easier in some ways, are surprisingly counterintuitive to how I think From Software wants you to approach these bosses.
I exclusively used NPC summons provided by the DLC, and still had a great time with very difficult experiences in the boss fights, as I just described. And if it's possible for me, it's possible for others. Henry saying that it goes against the developer's intent doesn't change that I literally just had that lived experience.
Shields are huge in the DLC, as are two-handed strength weapons, which not only after a couple of stance breaks per fight, but have the added benefit of making your one safe swing every full moon do considerably more damage than a lighter weapon would.
Except I used a deck-centric light greatsword for Renala and sometimes got 5 stance breaks in various attempts. Shields are a great option for solving a lot of different problems in Elden Ring. I guarantee you there are other options for the thing he's highlighting in this article. But now let's look at what Henry thinks about using different options in Elden Ring.
Ahem. You can Make Erdtree a lot easier for yourself by approaching its bosses as you would an AC6 fight, adjusting your build to fit their unique weaknesses and conquering them. Elden Ring as a game isn't great at facilitating this mechanically. Getting smithing stones, though the DLC is replete with them linked to the other article for SEO optimization, is a pain in the butt, and while you can snag a lot of larval tears in a given playthrough, they're still a limited resource.
Yes, many people dislike farming for resources in RPGs. Many people who play action RPGs prefer pure action games closer to Devil May Cry, where farming is unnecessary for the most part. It's okay to prefer that for those players, but there are also other kinds of players who enjoy farming and preparation. The players who liked gathering the ingredients to make oils and potions in the Witcher games, for example. I didn't change my build in order to specifically counter Renala's strengths. In fact, I'm pretty sure by going all in this mirror match idea that I felt was just really cool, actually gave me the least optimal way to approach the fight, because I was using elements, specifically magic and frost, which Relana had significant resistances to. It took a few dozen attempts, but I won, and it was fun.
Ahem. Chiefly, I was forced to alter my build. There are several attack patterns this boss has that more or less require a solid great shield. I also made use of Scarlet Rot to whittle down its health pool, rather than go on a scavenger hunt for my last 2 SocraTetris upgrades. This compromised the RPG elements of Elden Ring pretty massively.
Right, so to me it sounds like you ran up against the limit of your skill as it could be expressed with your chosen playstyle, and chose to try something you found less enjoyable because you are writing for a publishing deadline, binging the game, and beat the game in less than 2 weeks. He's talking about how he fought the final boss, by the way. I appreciate that Henry didn't really include any spoilers on what the final boss did or looked like so that I could stay media blind to it. I too binged the base game to the detriment of my enjoyment because I wanted to keep up with the discourse around the game, but I honestly don't believe that Randall was forced to use the heavy great shield. He chose an option that he knew he could make work even though he didn't enjoy it as much as what he was doing. He chose to have less fun and justified it by saying that the game required him to do something he did not enjoy, because he wanted to win and be done with it more than he wanted to enjoy himself, more than he wanted to have fun with the game. But I take significant issue with this idea that somehow this means the RPG elements of Elden Ring were compromised massively. Now we are getting to Randall's thesis statement.
From Software continues on its power creep trajectory that any future Souls games are going to veer further away from the ideals of skill-based merit and player choice, and into the realm of hardcore boss puzzles and rhythm game attack chains. In a sense, the harder a From Software game gets, the smaller the role-playing part of its action RPG heritage becomes.
Hardcore boss puzzles is a perfectly apt description of Demon Souls boss design. I literally made a video a few years back about the mega manning of Bloodborne to describe how Bloodborne even uses different element-based weaknesses that you can shift between over the course of a playthrough in order to get an advantage while playing, even though I don't think that's the focus of that particular game. Rhythm game attack chains is the definition of Sekiro's boss design. Skill-based merit and player choice seems to be this nebulous middle ground that doesn't fully explain what Henry's concept of the correct experience of the From Software game is supposed to be. What Henry describes here is that From Software's games are somehow moving away from giving you the experience of roleplay in the RPG because they aren't delivering on this esoteric, undefined concept of skill-based merit. But what is the skill that is meant to be tested in this? The skill isn't rhythm and response, because we just denied that a second ago. The skill isn't preparation and knowledge of enemy weaknesses, because we denied the exploration and the collecting of resources and changing builds. The skill isn't knowing how to use what the game makes available to you, like items and summons, and all the items designed to help you heal and buff your summons, because we started the article with saying that we denied the use of summons. But whatever the skill that actually deserves merit is, it somehow removes the essence of an RPG? Randall, that's bullshit. I'm playing an RPG with my Mikola crew. The Golden Age arc of Elden Ring is coming to an end, and I'm looking forward to seeing the Behelit pop off when I eventually get there. What does the experience of a role-playing game mean? Which skill base deserves merit? Your article doesn't tell me. And I think most of the time when we're having a conversation about this as Souls fans on forums and Reddit and in person and on our Discords, we have no idea what that is either. No one really does. They only have their own way of playing. Randall here is doing the same thing I'm doing now, trying to understand why this extremely good DLC is getting so much more negative attention than everything else From Software has done. His argument here states, from the outset, asserting that he did in fact play the DLC the correct and intended way. You just need the patience and the practice to engage with each fight and truly learn it. I agree with that, insofar as I agree that that is one way to play the game. He goes on to deny that the way I played, role-playing my travels as a party of adventurers with my spirit ashes and companion summons, while I used weapons and strategies that I found most fun rather than necessarily the best matchup, and he denies it by saying that it goes against the intended way to play the game. Yet Henry then goes on to critique another solution or playstyle of exploration, resource gathering, and changing your build to counter each boss as too tedious, too time-consuming, requiring too much player patience. That sort of engagement as the solution to the problem damages the experience of enjoying From Software games as an RPG specifically. My version of enjoying the game as a CRPG, he just said was against the developer's intent. What about the people that enjoy throwing on a podcast and farming for consumables and gear and larval tears and rune arcs so that they can be ready to change how they play at the drop of a hat? I spent 2 years doing that. I enjoyed killing millions of Albinorics while listening to the Castle Super Beast podcast for hundreds of hours. You, Randall, you binged the DLC for 4 straight days to completion. Of course you didn't have time to go pick the flowers. You played the DLC the way I played the base game. That made me impatient with different aspects of the game which I had not engaged with. Is that what we mean by developer intent? Is this developer intent thing not getting a bit ridiculous? Why does developer intent always end up meaning what I think you should have done? Whenever we use this argument of not playing the game in the intended way, we are actually doing one of two things. First, we are elevating our way of playing to a privileged position by projecting how we like to have fun onto the people who made it, onto the developers at From Software. Or 2, we are moving the goalpost on people who are frustrated or critiquing the game, telling them to play it differently. Do you see how these two versions of this argument are inherently in conflict with each other? In the first use of developer intent, we are narrowing people into a small mold of the correct way to play. If that isolated correct way to play ever comes at odds with a design in the game which encourages players to try otherwise, that correct way may stop working and piss people off. When people get mad that they, in good faith, came in with their correct ways of playing and find that they're not working, we then switch to the other developer intent argument. The second use of developer intent tells those people who are angry or frustrated after taking our advice to play a certain way and responds to them, well, you should have played differently. Look at all these other options you didn't use. Well, if you had just explored over here, you would have learned that you can do this one weird trick, Mikolas hate it, and use that to make the boss super doable. We as fans of From Software games first told them to play the game
correctly, under this narrow exclusionary idea of the intended way to play, only to then tell them that they should have tried everything and explored and discovered new ways of doing things. We tell them only after the fact that these games are about finding your way of playing and winning by any means necessary. We move the goalpost. Our shitty discourse around developer intent is exactly the reason Elden Ring's DLC, the best DLC From Software has ever made, is getting review bombed now. The swarm of these bad reviews aren't a conspiracy. They aren't being sent by some popular Twitch streamer. They aren't bots flooding a competitor. They are detailed, passionate reviews from actual players, writing at length about why they aren't having fun with Elden Ring. And almost all of them can be summarized as, I tried to play the game the correct way and it wasn't fun, so I stopped trying to have fun. Nearly all of them came at the DLC from the perspective we fans created with these developer intent arguments. The result was thousands of people with thousands of different understandings of the intended way to play, all of them not having fun, all of them not seeing that second developer intent argument until it was too late, because our discourse doesn't put that second argument of try everything first at the front of the conversation. We don't put try to find the fun at the start of the game. Our shitty discourse has finally reached the point of actively hurting the ratings, the fans, and future sales of the games we love. It has reached the point where we are creating articles and reviews where we are telling the developers of the game that the game they are making doesn't match the developer's intent. That's silly. We're being silly about video games. So can we just say fuck off to this developer intent nonsense? It doesn't matter how many game mechanics you point to, nor how many Miyazaki interviews you quote. You don't know the developer's intent. I don't know the developer's intent. The developers don't know their own intent because there's many of them with different intents. It's a nonsense term that means nothing because as an audience, we can do nothing but make an argument from ignorance. Can we stop acting like we are the only ones playing the game that was intended and start actually playing the game as it is? Can we start with the game that actually exists? Tell yourself, if you need to bridge that gap, everything included is intended. So can we start from that second argument from the beginning? We can start there by asking, what is the game encouraging me to try? How can I have fun with this game? We'll be much better off with that as a starting point than what we've been doing. Thank you for your time, and stay true.